Hi, Deanie again, and welcome to week 3. This week we're going to be talking about point of view. Now, point of view, when you write a story, your main protagonist is the person whose point of view you see the story through. So you see it from their context. They are your main point of reference as you view the story. Some stories do have multiple characters' points of view, but if you have too many, it's a bit like jumping in and out of people's heads. So what tends to happen is that you might see the story from one person's point of view in one chapter and then from another person's point of view in a different chapter. Points of view can get a little bit confusing because you need your reader to become invested in one character so that they can follow that character all the way through and understand the story from their point of view. That's not to say you can't have a great story with lots of different points of view. You've got to handle it quite carefully. There are 3 different points of view. There is first person, second person, and third person. And what I'm going to do is take you through all of those different points of view and see how they work and so that you can understand them. Okay, so first of all, we've got third person, and this is probably the most common point of view and also, I think personally, the easiest to write. Third person is when you're talking about your character in a slightly detached way using pronouns such as he, she, they, and referring to them by name. For example, the Harry Potter series is third person. It talks about Harry and he did this and Hermione did this, she did that. So that's all third person. It's an easy way to describe everything that's going on with that character. Third person actually comes in 2 different varieties. There is omniscient and limited. The first one, omniscient, is the word means all-knowing, and basically if you have a character, I've got, for example, in my book Free, my character Jem. She's in most of the scenes and it's in third person, so we see her and what she's doing and I refer to her, she does this and she does that. But there are some scenes where she isn't there, but I still want to show the action going on. And so I take an omniscient viewpoint that I, as the narrator of the story, can tell the reader what's happening to these other characters that Jem isn't necessarily seeing. So it's an all-knowing viewpoint. The other one is the limited, third person limited viewpoint, in which you only see what the character sees. So for example, the Harry Potter series, that's a limited viewpoint in that you only see what Harry sees. Now that can have some slight, I wouldn't say disadvantages, but it makes it slightly trickier when you want to show something that happens in the past or you want to show something that's happening to other characters that your main character shouldn't necessarily be in the same scene with. The way that J.K. Rowling got over that, for example, is when she wanted to show what happened in the past, Harry Potter used the pensive. He looked into their past, so you saw him seeing their past. When he wanted to see conversations that he wasn't part of, he would, for example, use the cloak of invisibility. So he was there and you were seeing people talking through his eyes, but he wasn't actually so much involved in that scene. So you've got the omniscient, where you can talk about what other characters are doing, but you see everything from the main character's point of view, but you do still go and see other scenes as well where they may not be there. And limited, where the character, the main protagonist, is always there and you see it as they see it. So next we've got first person point of view, and that's where you're using the I, me, we pronouns. So you are seeing the character and it's almost like the character's writing a journal and taking you on the story with them. For example, I went here, I saw this, we did that. It's much more intimate. You're along right by the side of your protagonist all the time. It does make action a little bit tricky because if there's lots of action in a scene, you can only write it if the main character sees that action happening. So if they don't physically see it, if they're not looking directly at it, if it's over there, they're not going to see it unless they hear it. So it's a little bit tricky, but it's very, very intimate first person. Some people absolutely hate first person point of view. They don't like reading it at all. Other people absolutely love it. My book, Crime and Cremation, I did an experiment and tried to write in first person and I really, really enjoyed it. But you do end up writing quite a lot of dialogue when you write in first person, just so that you can get the information across to the reader, because if the main character isn't seeing it, they have to have heard what's happening from other characters. So that's a way of bringing in what's going on around them without them actually having to see it. There's a good example, a book that's very popular at the moment, Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Okay by Gail Honeyman. That's a book I'm reading at the moment on my Kindle, and that's quite a nice book because it's very specifically first person. So I recommend you have a look at that to get an idea of how first person works. So the final point of view is second person, and this is where you are the main point of view, you are the main character. It's a little bit like you're being directed in a play, for example, and I've got a little extract to help you understand it a bit better. You open the door, expecting it to be a withering mother, but no, you find yourself face to face with a scarlet-faced teenager holding a gun. You don't know what to do, and the split second you take to consider your options proves to be the undoing of you. So you can see that it's a little bit like you're being directed, you're being told what to do at every stage. It's quite difficult to write, and it's also quite difficult to read because it's so very much you are being directed. There was a very good series though in the 1980s called Choose Your Own Adventure by Edward Packard, which were adventure books with different pathways where you were the main character and you were directed in different directions, and then you got to choose what your next direction is. So in that kind of a book, it works absolutely brilliantly. But there are very few books actually written in second person because it is quite awkward to read and quite awkward to write as well. Okay, so we're going to go through a couple of exercises now to practice the different points of view. All the exercises are in the blog post that goes with this video, so do look them up there. The first exercise is first person point of view, and we're talking about a character called Liam. I always find it quite nice to find a picture of someone on the internet who's going to be my character, and then I can refer to them, I know what they look like. So, your character Liam is stuck on a train. He had to work late again because it's the only way to keep on top of his workload and ensure he meets his deadlines. He has two younger executives snapping at his heels for his job, which is precarious under the latest management reshuffle. The train that Liam is on is Southern Rail, so it's indefinitely delayed. He promised to help his wife Lisa move the bed around in the spare room so that her parents could come to stay at the weekend. There's no phone signal to call Lisa to let her know that he's on his way home. He forgot to call her before he left the office. It's 9:45, so you can imagine that Liam's probably going to be in a bit of trouble. So what I want you to do, taking all that information about Liam, I want you to write a couple of paragraphs on his frustration from his own perspective using first person point of view. So for example, I'm stuck on this train. I forgot to charge my phone. Oh no, Lisa's going to be furious at me. So you are going to be writing about Liam using I, me, we pronouns. So have a go at that. Okay, so your second exercise is going to be third person point of view. Now, we're going to look at Lisa. Lisa is actually Liam's wife. So this is the information about Lisa. Lisa is beginning to wonder if her husband, Liam, is having an affair. She's a busy school teacher in a tiny village school, and she doesn't get out of the village very often, so she has quite a limited understanding of commuting and working in a business environment. What I'd like you to do is to write a couple of paragraphs about Lisa's worries from her own perspective using third person point of view. So something like, for example, Lisa kept checking her messages, but there was nothing for Liam. Where could he be, she wondered. So you're talking about her in a slightly more detached way. Liam was written in first person, so you were very much there, almost reading his journal about what was going on. Whereas when we're talking about Lisa, because you're writing in third person, she's going to be someone you are talking about, so you're a little bit more detached from her. So just a couple of paragraphs from Lisa's point of view, but using third person. Okay, so we've looked at points of view, but I want to look at something slightly different, which is a perspective of a baddie's point of view. It's not a technical point of view, it's more of a perspective, but it's an area of a character that we don't always look at. The majority of characters that we read about tend to be good characters, characters on a mission. It's not often that we read about a character or main character that is completely bad. And in fact, as a reader, you'd probably find it quite difficult to read about a character who had no redeeming factors about them whatsoever, someone who was just so thoroughly awful, you wouldn't become that invested in reading about them. You might read about someone who's thoroughly bad by reading about their victim, because then you'd want to be invested in their victim getting through whatever it is they've got to get through. But for the baddie's perspective, that might not be something that you could really stomach or want to read through. So if you're going to be writing a story from the viewpoint or perspective of a bad person, that bad person needs to have some endearing qualities, something that makes the reader hook onto them. For example, it might be that they've got a past that explains exactly why they are the way that they are, which will give you reason to hope that actually maybe they won't always be like that. An example of that, it's not from the book, but it's from the film, but hopefully a lot of you will have seen this film. It's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. The main character, played by Alan Rickman, the Sheriff of Nottingham, was a thoroughly despicable and unlikable character, and yet he's probably one of the most loved characters in that film. In the film, we see scenes where he has a despicable mother who's evil and horrible to him, and you can see why he's become the man he is. The fact that it's played by Alan Rickman probably helps as well, but that's beside the point. Another example of the viewpoint of a bad person or a baddie is the Karate Kid, the original film. Now, it's something quite interesting that I found out later after I've watched it. The original film has a very clear bully and a victim. The bully is the Karate Kid, and then there's the kid from the other, the victim is the Karate Kid, and the bully is the kid from the other dojo who's always having a go at him. I read, after having watched the film many times, that actually the bully was actually somewhat the victim, and the victim was quite often bullying the bully. If you ever had a chance to watch it again, you'll see that that does actually happen. And very interestingly, later on, a TV series was made where the two characters are grown up. And in fact, you see their relationship, and you see how the perceived bully was actually bullied by the Karate Kid, and how the perceived victim, the Karate Kid, wasn't quite as much of a victim as he was made out to be. What this shows you is that it depends through whose eyes you see the story. That's where you get your perception of what's going on. So if you see your eyes through the perception, or if you see the story through the eyes of the bully, you will see them being bullied, and you'll see the bad person bullying them. But if you were to see the story through the eyes of the bully, for example, you might see that actually they are more of a victim than the person who's being victimized will let you believe. It really makes a difference whose eye you see the story from, and also the person telling the story might not be totally honest about what they're telling you. So you've got to bear that in mind. So thinking about that, what I'd like you to do is to write a short story of about 500 words about a baddie, someone who's perceived as being bad. But to make the story palatable, I want you to give that baddie some endearing qualities. Maybe he's had a bad childhood. Maybe he's actually quite funny and not very good at being bad. Or perhaps he's got a victim who's a complete pain in the neck, who drives everyone mad, who at the end of it you think, well, actually I'd like to bump him off, he's awful. So write a short story with a baddie, and if you'd like to put it in the post comments, that would be absolutely fantastic. So we've just been talking about bad characters and how they need to have some endearing features to make them more interesting. Well, the same applies to a good character as well. In fact, any character needs to have good and bad points, because otherwise they're going to be a flat character, a flat baddie or a flat goodie. That doesn't really exist. People, even the best of people, have some irritating traits, and even the worst of people have something endearing about them. Perhaps they're tidy or they're nice to their mother. When you're looking at your characters and about to write about your characters, it's a really good idea to create a character profile for them. Most authors, when they're creating longer works, will create a series of character profiles for their main characters, just so that they know everything about them and so that they can treat them the same way whenever they refer to them. So they'll list things like how they look, what they sound like, any strange mannerisms, what they're good at, what they're bad at, what their hobbies are, and their good points and their negative points as well. And in fact, I've created a couple of character profiles in the blog post that goes with this, and a character profile download sheet that you can use. Here's an example of one of my own character profiles. which shows you a sort of bad person. This person called Georgina Larson. There's lots of details about her, but importantly, I've put that she's got 4 negative characteristics. Things like she likes to argue with people, she's very vain, she's opinionated and unfiltered, and she's lazy with anything she doesn't like doing. But I've also included a couple of positive points as well, because even bad people have some good points. And if you're writing about a good character, you would probably reverse this and have all of these as good points, and maybe a couple of negative points about them as well, just to make them a properly rounded, decent, interesting character. So I've got a little exercise based on that, and you might want to download those character profile sheets from my blog post. What I'd like you to do is to create 5 character profiles. 5 totally different characters. They can be good or bad or a mixture of both of them, but 5 individual characters. And then when you've done that, as the second part of this exercise, what I'd like you to do is to take those 5 individual characters and to put them in an unusual situation. For example, put them at a puppy farm where they've got to go and rescue some puppies. Put them in the middle of a disaster at a theme park. Put them in a party where they've all met each other for the first time. Just take them all and put them somewhere different, and use your character profiles and what you know about each character to write how they're going to interact with each other. So write a short story or a scene, maybe about 1,500 words, thereabouts, just about what happens. Choose one of the characters before you start writing it to be the main character, so we see all of the action from their point of view. And you can choose to write in either first person or third person, I don't mind. And again, I'd love to see what you've written, so please feel free to post any of your writing in the blog post that goes with this video. So that's the end of week 3. We've looked at points of view, Baddie's perspective and character profiles, and I've given you lots of exercises to do. So do try and do as much as you can. I'd love to see anything you've written in the blog post in the comments. And if you've got any questions as well, please do post those as well. Good luck with all the exercises. There's lots of work there, and enjoy it. I look forward to seeing you again on week 4.